Hello everybody. Spider-Man and I want to catch you up on the Apocrypha. Sometimes these books are a mystery to us Protestants, and so I've invited Martin Luther and Pope Francis to join us as well. Looks like the Pope is about to slap Martin, but I'd be careful if I were him because Martin is still carrying his hammer. Oh my. Well, let's move on. I want to talk to you about the Apocrypha because it comes up somewhat in our discussion of the early church father Jerome and his translation of the scriptures from the Hebrew and Greek into the Latin Vulgate. So let's talk about the Apocrypha. The Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox Bibles have additional books that are not in our Protestant Bible. There are about 15 books, including additions to Esther and Daniel. Now, we Protestants call these books the Apocrypha, which means hidden. We consider them useful for history and edification, but they are not inspired. The Catholics call these Bibles deuterocanonical, meaning a second canon, and they do consider them authoritative for both church life and practice. Now, here's a list of the books that are included in the Apocrypha. There are a number of prophetic books. There's quite a few books of wisdom. There are additions to Daniel and to Esther, as I have already mentioned. And then there are at least two, very important historical books, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. And these books tell us about the war of the Jews against the Seleucid Empire in the intertestamental period. And we are grateful for the information and for the history that is available there because it's available nowhere else. So again, these books are historical and educational. Now, the books in the Apocrypha were written from 300 years before Christ to about 100 years AD, and most of them, but not all, were written in Greek. And so, for these reasons, the apocryphal books are not included in the Hebrew scriptures. First of all, they're not Hebrew. Second of all, they were written quite late. The authority of the Pentateuch, for example, was recognized immediately after completion. And so very early on, we have the core of the Hebrew canon, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And the remainder of the Hebrew canon was closed no later than 150 BC. Some would say 250 years before Christ. And so the Hebrew canon was closed really about the same time that the apocryphal books were beginning to be written. Now, the Septuagint is an important factor in the canon of the Hebrew scripture, as well as other important reasons. The Septuagint is the Hebrew scriptures translated into Greek. This took place about 250 years before Christ, and it took place in Alexandria for the Jews who were in the diaspora. In other words, they had left Israel to move into Egypt, Persia, Asia Minor, Greece, even Rome, and so they were in Greek-speaking territory. These later descendants lost their use of Hebrew, and so they needed their scriptures in Greek, and that was the purpose for the Septuagint. Now, all of the apocryphal books, except for Second Esdras, are included in the Septuagint, and so many of our church fathers quote from these books because they use the Septuagint almost exclusively. But quoting from the Apocrypha does not suggest that they considered these books inspired. Now, an important milestone in the history of the Apocrypha took place beginning in 386. Pope Damasus of Rome commissioned Jerome to translate the Bible into Latin, Latin being the common language in the Roman Empire at the time. And so that's the reason why we call Jerome's translation the Vulgate, because that word comes from a Latin word meaning common. And although Jerome used the Septuagint as a guide for his translation, he based his translation of the Old Testament on the Hebrew original, not on the Greek. And when he translated the apocryphal books from Greek into Latin, he added prefaces that explained that he did not consider these books inspired. He considered them useful for instruction, history, even devotional use, but not authoritative. And this is very important for us to remember, that even though the apocryphal books are in the Vulgate, Jerome did not consider them inspired and authoritative. But Catholic scribes who copied the Vulgate over and over again included copies of the apocryphal books, but did not include the prefaces. So eventually the Catholic Church included them in their canon. So this is why the Catholic Church includes the apocryphal books. Now, the Reformers in the 16th century emphasized sola scriptura, the sole authority of the Scripture, and therefore it was very important for them to determine what constitutes the Scriptures. And so they began to examine the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, to see what indeed should be considered authoritative. Martin Luther, John Calvin, and others, they followed the Hebrew canon, just like Jerome did, and so they rejected the Apocrypha. Now, furthermore, the Catholics used a passage from 2 Maccabees to support their doctrines of purgatory, prayers for the dead, indulgences, and works-based salvation. The story is told in 2 Maccabees chapter 12 that Judas Maccabeus, the general of the Jewish army, came upon a battlefield strewn with the bodies of Jewish soldiers. As he and his soldiers sought to bury them, they found around their necks foreign amulets that were surprising to find, these idolatrous tokens. And so there was concern that these fallen comrades had died with some examples of idolatry around their neck. And so Judas asked his soldiers to pray for their colleagues, and then he took up an offering to give to the temple treasury in order to pay for their sins. Well, the narrator of this passage spoke with approval of these actions, and so you can see how this story would support Catholic doctrines of purgatory, prayers for the dead, works-based salvation, and so on. And you can also see why the Reformers would want to set this particular story aside, because it did not fit their teaching against purgatory and indulgences. Now, the Catholic Church, in response to the advance of the Protestants, called the Council of Trent, began in 1545. It continued until 1563. But at the meeting in 1546, the Roman Catholic Church declared the Vulgate the only authorized version of the Holy Bible. And so Catholics could read the Bible, have access to the Bible only in the Latin language. But at the same time, they confirmed the status of the Apocrypha as canonical and authoritative. Now, in the decades following the Council of Trent, in 1566, Sixtus of Siena, who was a converted Jew, coined the terms proto-canonical and deuterocanonical to refer respectively to the original Hebrew canon and also to those books that were canonized later. And so Sixtus recognized that there was an original Hebrew canon that was written, approved, and authorized before this second canon was even written, much less approved. Now, the apocryphal books are scattered throughout the Catholic Old Testament. But the Protestants treat the Apocrypha very differently today. There are some Protestant Bibles that include the Apocrypha, but they insert it between the Old and the New Testaments. A good example is this Revised Standard Version that includes the Apocrypha, but we have the Old Testament, we have the Apocrypha in the center, and then we have the New Testament. Okay, now I have this book in my library because often I need to consult the books of the Apocrypha for history, for information about the Catholic Church and about this period of time. And so I'm glad to have this new Revised Standard Version of the Holy Bible with the Apocrypha. I also have reference books about the Septuagint and the Apocrypha because it's important for us to know about it. It's important for us to relate to our Catholic neighbors to understand why their Bible is different from ours and why their Bible includes books that we do not. Why is that? Did we just rip those pages out and cast them away because we disagree with them? Not at all. It's because these are a secondary group of books written after the Hebrew canon was authorized. And so, although they are interesting, they're educational, they're historical, they are not authoritative. They're not inspired. And so for us, we can be confident that our Bible is complete. And I hope that helps you understand the Apocrypha and its place in Christian history. Thanks for listening, and hope you have a good day.